Hello, my name is Dr. Lakeisha Meyer, and I am the Director of the Office of Accessibility Resources at Bucknell University. The office is also referred to as the OAR, so that's how I will be referring to it throughout the rest of this session. The OAR is the office on campus that supports students with disabilities. Our job is to make sure that every student with a disability has complete, full, equal access to every aspect of the institution. That includes everything from the classroom to the residence hall. One of the primary functions of the office is to help students who need accommodations request and receive those so that they can have the supports that they need in order to be successful, or as I said, have equal access. We are the office that processes requests for accommodations. We also work to educate campus about different things related to disability, such as the social model of disability and how universal design for learning principles can be applied to improve accessibility across campus. The primary function of the OAR is to help students who need accommodations in order to access aspects of the university to request those and be approved and access those. I would like to talk a little bit about the process for requesting and utilizing accommodations at Bucknell. In order to request accommodations, a student should go to the Accessibility Resources webpage and complete the Disability Accommodation Request form. It's an online form that asks questions related to your disability and the accommodations that you are requesting. In order for your request to be processed, you do also have to provide documentation to support your accommodation request. Documentation for academic accommodations generally consists of the report that led to the development of the IEP or the medical documentation that supported the development of a 504 plan. Providing the actual IEP or 504 plan is helpful but not required. What we primarily need is that original source of documentation from the provider or the report from the evaluation that resulted in the development of those plans. For accommodations other than academic accommodations, documentation must also be provided. This documentation should be from a medical provider. It should indicate the diagnosis and describe how it is a disabling condition. A condition is considered a disability if it significantly limits a major life activity. So in order to receive accommodations, the first thing that must be met is that the student must have a disability. Once that is established, the documentation should include specific information about how the disability limits the individual and what specific recommendations they would make in order to address those needs. Once the accommodation form and documentation are submitted, I review the request and the documentation to determine the most appropriate reasonable accommodations for the student. Accommodations are modifications that are made to the task or environment that allow the student to have equal access. Accommodations are only considered reasonable if they are not a fundamental alteration of a course or some other aspect of the institution. Regarding academic accommodations, every student who is approved must meet with me at the start of the semester to discuss their accommodations, go over processes and procedures related to the OAR, and also draft the letter that we will send to the professors letting them know about your approved accommodations. In order for a student to utilize their accommodations, after the letter is sent to their professors during this meeting, the student is required to schedule a meeting with each of their professors to discuss their approved accommodations and how they are going to access them in their particular course. This is a really important conversation that needs to take place at the start of every semester with each professor where accommodations are going to be utilized. This is really one of the main things that's different about how the accommodation process looks and works in college versus what the process was like in high school. In high school, typically a student's IEP or 504 plan kind of follows them from year to year, and their teachers are notified about any accommodations that the student may need. At the college level, this is a bit different. Each semester, the student has to initiate the letters being sent to their professors letting them know about their accommodations. We no longer have IEPs or 504 plans. What we have is a letter of accommodation that identifies for the professor the specific accommodations they're required to provide the student so that they have equal access. The letter of accommodation doesn't include any information about the student's disability. Rather, it includes the specific list of accommodations that the professor needs to provide. Students, when they have the conversation with their professor about their accommodations, can decide to what extent they want to share any details of their disability and their disability-related needs. They're only required, though, to discuss the accommodations and make sure that there's a plan for obtaining those or receiving those. For example, if a student is approved to receive a copy of the PowerPoints for the lectures prior to class, the student will, at this meeting, want to have a conversation with the professor about how to obtain those. Will the professor email them to the student? Are they posted on the course management system? These are the types of questions that you'll want to address. For students who have testing accommodations, which are also very common, the student will want to find out from their professor whether or not they can provide the extended time or alternative space to take the exam. If for some reason the professor cannot or the student's schedule doesn't allow, there is a testing center available for students to utilize who are approved for accommodations of extended time or being able to take their test in a separate area. This is more of a backup option if the professor can't provide the accommodation. In an ideal situation, the student will have access to their professor. Another difference between high school and university setting is that students are expected to be stronger self-advocates. There's a higher degree of independence that's expected of students once you reach the college setting. This doesn't mean that you don't have access to the supports and services that you need to gain equal access, but it does mean that you are required to take the initiative more in terms of accessing any important resources and also making sure that your professors are notified about your accommodations. Because this is a significant transition, this is one area that I really want to make sure I provide the support that you need in order to make this transition smooth. If you have any concerns about reaching out to your professors or having that initial conversation, this is something that we can work on and talk through during that initial meeting that we have at the start of the semester. During that meeting, I'll ask how comfortable you are having the conversation with your professor about your accommodations. If you have concerns about reaching out to them, initiating that contact, these are things that we can work on together during that meeting. For parents, typically, if you have a student with accommodations, you've been very involved and have been a strong advocate for your student throughout their school career. I do not expect this to be a sudden discontinuation of that support. This is more of a gradual handoff from you as the family to the institution in terms of helping your student develop their self-advocacy skills. So one of the things that I like to stress in terms of preparing for a smooth transition is that you start having these conversations with your student early about how comfortable are they reaching out to their professors? Do they have questions about how to have a conversation about their disability or their accommodations? One of the keys to a successful transition is having that meeting with me at the start of the semester and then having a successful follow-up meeting with each of your professors about your accommodations. Something else that will help with a smooth transition is becoming familiar with all of the resources available on campus. This is something that we'll also go over during that initial meeting, and I will help to make sure you're aware of resources related to academic support in terms of particular courses, but also academic coaching that's available to students who may need help with planning, organization, or other skills of that sort. In conclusion, the OAR is the office that's here to make sure that you have the supports that you need as a student with a disability to be successful. I want this transition to be smooth, and I'm here to offer my support in any way that would be helpful. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have questions about the accommodation process, about the documentation that's required, or about anything related to disability services on campus.